The high council chamber was cold and silent that mid-morning. The stone walls just sucked all the warmth right out of the room. The council elder, a man with a thin white beard, pointed a bony finger right at me. His voice echoed under the vaulted ceiling when he gave the command. "Shift now, Alara Vance." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My knees locked to keep me upright. I dug my nails deep into my own palms, fighting the sudden pressure building inside my chest. A deep ache started in my bones. My skin prickled like it was covered in ants. I fought the change with every ounce of my will. I squeezed my eyes shut and shook my head. I could smell old parchment and ozone. I heard the low murmur of the other council members. They were just watching me struggle against my own body. I tried to focus on the smooth marble floor beneath my feet. I tried to anchor myself to that one solid thing. Then I heard it. A sharp, wet snap echoed in the silent chamber. White-hot pain shot up my right arm. I watched in horror as the bone broke and reformed right under my skin, but it wasn't the clean line of a wolf's foreleg. The limb that came out was twisted, strange, covered in short silver fur that shimmered with this opal fire. The whole council gasped and stepped back from their table. I just stared at my own distorted paw. The elder smiled this cold, thin smile that never reached his eyes, and a dreadful realization washed over me. This was what they were afraid of. I hid the strange limb against my chest. I was trembling from the pain and the shock. And then I felt it, this deep, resonant tug behind my ribs. My eyes were dragged across the chamber against my will. Kalen Thorne, the dark-haired alpha, stood rigid near the doors. His intense golden eyes were wide, fixed right on me. A muscle in his jaw jumped, and for just one heartbeat I saw raw shock there. Not just dominance. An invisible thread between us pulled taut. It sang with this painful warmth. He took one step forward, his gaze sweeping over the stunned council. His voice was low, absolute. It left no room for debate. "She is mine." One thing kept pulling at me afterward: why his voice had left no room for debate. The phantom grip of his claim still clenched my ribs, like a cage of ice I couldn't expand against. My knees hit the frigid, damp stone of the holding cell floor. The only sound was my own shaky breath echoing off the close walls. Then the heavy door scraped open. Kalen Thorne, the alpha who had claimed me, filled the doorway. He stepped inside and let the door clang shut behind him. He was a tall man, broad shoulders that seemed to strain his dark shirt. "You will stay quiet until I return," he said. His voice was flat. I pulled myself onto the narrow cot and wrapped my arms tight around my knees. I didn't answer him. He didn't move to leave. He stood with his back to the door, his eyes on the single dim light bulb above my head. He kept glancing at the thick metal door. He was stalling. The air smelled faintly of old moss and wet stone. He rubbed the back of his neck. The movement was slow, tired. It was the first thing I'd seen from him that wasn't pure control. "They shouldn't have done it like that," he muttered. He said it so low I almost missed it. He hadn't meant for me to hear. His jaw tightened right after, a sharp line in the shadows. He finally turned toward the door. He had to pass close to my cot to reach it. Our shoulders almost brushed as he moved. He stopped. The space between us hummed with a strange warmth. It was a deep, cellular pull that made my breath catch. The way he'd looked at me just then. It wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with that. He stood there for one more second, a solid and silent shape. Then he walked out. The lock slid home with a final sound. I was left alone with the echo and this confusing ache in my chest. Whatever came next. What he'd meant by "they shouldn't have done it like that," that was the part I hadn't figured out yet. I moved toward the door, my hands starting to shake when I read the label. The phantom pressure of Kalen's grip still ached deep in my forearm. And here's where it gets crazy. 2 nights later, I stood in the estate's secure comms room. The only sound was the persistent, subaudible hum of the encryption field vibrating in my ears. A single monitor glowed in the dark. My hands were slick with sweat against the cold metal console. I had to make this call. Marcus would think I was dead, or worse. Kalen's head of security gave me a 10-minute window. He said the alpha was away on urgent pack business. I didn't believe him. "Real quick, if you're here for the secrets they tried to bury, hit subscribe. Trust me, we're just getting started." I entered the complex bypass sequence Marcus himself had designed. My heart hammered against my ribs as the connection pulsed. The screen flickered to life with a grainy image of Marcus's worried face. His hair was a mess. His glasses were smudged. "Alara, thank God," his voice crackled through the speakers. He leaned closer. "They said you were secure, but they wouldn't let me speak to you. Are you hurt?" I'm functional, I said, my voice rough from disuse. They can't keep me in a cell forever, so it's a nice room now. I forced a tight smile. The guilt for dragging him into this was a physical weight on my chest. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. There was a difference. You need to stop digging, Marcus. It's too dangerous. Too late, he said. He tapped at a keyboard off-screen. I already got into some archived server logs. Your mother's name is all over a black-budget project. The code name was Opal Genesis. A file transfer notification popped up on my screen. I'm sending you what I have. It's not the whole story, but it's a start. His expression turned grim. And Alara, Vex Drogan's tech guy, flagged my access attempts. They know someone is looking. A cold dread seeped into my stomach. Before I could respond, a new voice cut through the comms channel. Deep, controlled. They know a human is looking. The monitor split. Kalen Thorne appeared on the feed, his broad shoulders framed by the leather of his study chair. He had been listening the entire time. His eyes were fixed on Marcus's image, but his thumb was rubbing a slow, absent circle on the arm of his chair. You have impressive loyalty, Mr. Finch, Kalen said, and poor survival instincts. Marcus flinched but held his ground. I'm getting her out of that bond. Kalen's thumb stopped moving. A strange, hot ache bloomed behind my sternum at Marcus's words, a confusing mix of hope and fear. Kalen's gaze shifted to me. He studied my face on his screen, my defiant hope. He didn't terminate the call. Send the files, Kalen said, his voice a low rumble. Then you will cease your inquiries. You do not understand what you are touching. He leaned forward, his presence dominating the shared screen. What they did to her, it was not a ritual. It was a procedure. Something locked my breath in place. This was what he'd meant by they shouldn't have done it like that. This was the heart of it. The defiant hope Marcus sparked still hummed in my chest like a second, warmer heartbeat. I forced my fingers to stay still on the cool, engraved silver of my dinner knife as Vex Drogan's laughter echoed off the vaulted hall's stone walls. Kalen Thorne, my alpha, sat at the head of the long table. His posture was rigid with control. Vex, the rival alpha with cold blue eyes, lounged to his right as an unwelcome guest. I turned to Elder Arlo seated on my left. I kept my voice clear and carried it down the table. I asked him about the legal precedent for an Omega's appeal of a compelled bond. The entire table went quiet. Kalen's golden eyes fixed on me. His knuckles were white around his wine glass. Vex leaned forward with a sharp, hungry smile. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked directly at Kalen. An interesting quality in a claimed mate, Vex said. Is such public questioning normal for the Silvermane pack? It speaks to assert instability. Kalen's voice was a low growl that vibrated in my bones. She is still adjusting to pack life. He turned his gaze to me, a final warning. Sit down, be silent. The alpha command behind the words was a physical blow. It wrapped around my lungs and squeezed. I fought it with everything I had. I pushed back against the pressure forcing me into my chair. My muscles trembled with the strain. A sharp pain spiked behind my eyes. I saw the triumphant gleam in Vex's gaze as he watched my struggle. The command won. My body obeyed against my will. I sat down hard in my chair. My breath came in short, painful gasps. The humiliation burned my cheeks. I stared at my plate. I could not lift my fork. I could not speak. Kalen looked at Vex. The matter is settled. The bond is absolute. His tone dared Vex to challenge him again. Vex raised his glass in a mock toast. Absolute bonds make for interesting politics. His eyes never left my face. He studied my pain like a blueprint. A flicker of warmth from Kalen through the bond was a brief pulse of regret beneath his fury. Then it was gone, sealed behind his wall of control. The table fell into a heavy, tense silence. Kalen resumed eating with precise, controlled movements. He did not look at me. I sat beside him as a statue of silent, pained obedience. Vex watched us both. His predatory gaze moved from Kalen's scarred profile to my frozen form. I knew what he saw. He saw a weapon. My defiance had shown him a crack. Kalen's reaction had widened it into a chasm. The bond between us felt like a chain he could yank at any time. My hope for Marcus felt very far away. My hands were clenched in my lap. They did not shake now. They were fists of solid, furious rock. The transformation inside me was not into something docile. It was into something harder and far more dangerous. So what would you do? When the person who claims to own you is the only one who knows what was done to you, do you fight the cage or do you learn to pick the lock? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see how this ends, make sure you're subscribed. The library was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place to breathe, to think. But my own thoughts were the trap. Everything else I could deal with. The commands, the control, the cold silences across the dinner table. But the echo of what Kalen had said under his breath. That was different. It wouldn't leave me alone. The ghost of that paralyzing command still clenched my jaw like a phantom vice. I found myself in the library's midnight hush, the only sound the frantic skitter of some insect trapped inside a lampshade. I pressed my forehead against the cold leather spine of a book. A sharp, cold breath caught in my throat. I hadn't chosen this cage of a bond. And he hadn't chosen me either. He hadn't chosen me, the bond had. There was a difference. That truth was a cold stone lodged in my throat. A tear tracked a hot path down to my chin before I could stop it. I let it fall. There was no one to see. Ilara. His voice came from the entrance, a low rumble in the quiet. Kalen stood silhouetted against the dim hall light. He wore a dark t-shirt and his usual mask of control. I wiped my cheek quickly with the back of my hand and turned my face away. I didn't want him to see this unraveling. He walked toward me, his footsteps silent on the thick rug. He stopped an arm's length away. He didn't reach for me. He just looked, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. The feedback through the bond, he said finally. His voice was quieter than I expected. It feels like a static burn. It keeps me awake. He hadn't planned to say that. I saw the slight tightening at the corner of his eye as he realized his own admission. He'd just shown me a single, thin wire in his armor. I didn't know what to do with the knowledge that my pain reached him, that it was an annoyance he couldn't switch off. I stayed silent, clutching the file on Opal Genesis tighter to my chest. "What do you want?" I asked. My own voice sounded ragged. He looked at the blanket draped over a nearby chair, then back at my hunched shoulders. "I came to find the source of the disturbance." He took a slow breath. "I can make it stop. I know how." He meant the bond, the procedure. He wasn't offering to break it. He was stating a fact of his ownership, like a technician discussing a faulty mechanism. The warmth of the bond in my chest ached in response, a stupid, traitorous pull. He moved then, not toward me, but to the chair. He picked up the blanket. With a sharp snap of fabric, he unfolded it. He closed the small distance between us and draped the heavy wool over my shoulders. His hands didn't linger. The weight was sudden and surprisingly warm. He looked at me for one more second, his gaze dropping to the file in my hands. Then he turned and walked out of the library without another word. I stood frozen under the blanket, the unexpected comfort a greater shock than any command. The rest I could explain. His control, his anger, his cold logic. Why he draped a blanket over my shoulders and left without a word. That didn't make any sense at all. The wool's lingering warmth still felt alien against my skin the next day. I stood in the archive's sterile air, the low hum of the climate control vibrating through my boots. Marcus gave the clerk a charming smile and slid a single gold coin across the polished stone counter. "One last look for my thesis," Marcus said, his voice smooth. He leaned in close to the nervous clerk, a young man with a bad haircut. The clerk's eyes darted toward the single security camera. His thin fingers tapped a frantic rhythm on the ledger. He shook his head, but his hands trembled as he reached for a key ring. A heavy door behind him clicked open, revealing a room choked with dust. Marcus moved into the stale gloom with a purpose I admired. He ran a finger along the spines of cracked leather folders. The scent of mildew and old paper filled my nose. He found the file labeled Opal Genesis on a high shelf. A small red light on the wall panel began to flash in silent alarm. A loud metallic thunk echoed from somewhere down the long hall behind us. The sound sealed my throat with cold dread. The main exit door was now shut tight, its magnetic lock engaged. Marcus clutched the file to his chest, his face set. His glasses caught the dim light as he scanned the room. He spotted a rusted grate low on the opposite wall, half hidden behind a fallen shelf. He dropped to his knees and pulled at the corroded screws with his bare hands. I heard the distant shuffle of heavy boots approaching fast. He yanked the grate free just as the clerk cried out in the hall, his voice cut short by a muffled thump. Marcus shoved the file into his jacket and vanished into the dark duct. I followed. I tried to put it all away, to lock it down and just get on with things. But the memory of that sound, the clerk's voice cut off by that sickening thump, it refused to stay put. The grit from the archive duct still coated my throat. Kalen's guest suite greeted me, with the scent of night-blooming jasmine from the open balcony doors. I stood there, clutching the hidden drive inside my jacket pocket. Kalen was already in the room, waiting. He held a crumpled piece of paper between his fingers. He didn't greet me. He just said, Marcus Finch's apartment was attacked, an hour after moonrise. He held out the paper for me to take. My heart pounded once hard, then settled into a heavy, sick rhythm. I snatched the note from his hand. Vex Drogon's name was scrawled at the bottom above a phone number. The message was a simple offer for a private meeting. The paper itself smelled like ozone and damp stone. I shoved Kalen's chest with the flat of my hand. My eyes burned with sudden heat. I knew my temper was making them flash. You led them right to him, I said. My voice was low and shaking. You tracked our call, and you sent your people. He didn't move from the shove. He stood stiffly and absorbed the accusation. His own gaze stayed fixed on the floor near my feet. Then his shoulders dropped in a slow slump I had never seen before. He ran a hand back through his dark hair. Vex can offer you a normal life, he said. His voice sounded hollow. I can only offer you this. He gestured at the tense space between our bodies. He can offer you a clean break from all of this. He finally looked at me then, and the way he looked at me, it wasn't the bond. I didn't know what to do with that. I stared down at the crumpled note in my palm. My anger faded into a cold and heavy dread. The jasmine scent from the balcony seemed suddenly cloying. I did not trust Vex's offer for a single second, and I realized, with a sickening drop in my stomach, that I did not fully trust Kalen's protection either. He had draped the blanket over my shoulders and left me alone. He had given me a moment of peace without demanding anything in return. That small act meant he understood the weight of his own cage. And now, he was waiting to see what I would choose. I let the note fall to the polished wood floor. I kept my eyes on him. I will accept your protection, I said. For Marcus and for me, but my agreement is only for uncovering the truth about my mother. He gave a single, sharp nod. The unspoken thing between us was Vex's offer. It was the freedom Kalen knew he could not give me. The air in the room felt charged and still, and I couldn't help but wonder, what would Kalen do if he found that note on the floor? I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the answer. The phantom weight of Kalen's signet ring still pressed against my palm where he'd placed it. Stepping into Marcus's shattered apartment, I immediately tasted the dry, bitter dust of shattered drywall in the air. Kalen Thorne, my alpha mate, stepped in front of me with a low growl. His broad shoulders blocked my view of the room, but he couldn't block the smell. The coppery scent of blood mixed with the sharp musk of strange wolves. It coated my tongue and made my stomach twist. I pushed past his protective stance. My foot crunched on broken glass from a picture frame. A torn photograph of my mother lay on the floor near my boot. I knelt and picked up the pieces with careful fingers. My breath hitched in my chest. This violation felt more personal than all the splintered furniture. Kalen moved past me toward the desk. He crouched and pointed at a small panel beneath it. The wood was splintered and pried completely open. They were looking for something small, Kalen said. His voice was tight with controlled anger. I reached for the empty hiding spot at the same moment he did. My fingers brushed against his arm, and a sudden spark of warmth shot up my arm from the mate bond. It was a sharp ache, followed by a flicker of unwanted comfort. We both froze and pulled our hands back. I looked at him and saw his golden eyes were wide. He stared back at me for a second too long. He did not speak. I did not know what to do with that silent crack in his armor. I turned away first, my heart pounding. I needed to focus. Marcus had secrets within secrets. My gaze scanned the overturned bookcase, and then I remembered his terrible habit. I went to the shelf and found the hollowed-out book. My fingers slipped inside the false pages. They closed around a cool metal drive. I pulled the hidden backup drive free. A faint blue light pulsed in the corner of the room behind me. Kalen's enforcer, a tall woman named Riva, pointed at it. Alpha, she said. Her tone was a warning. The light came from a council surveillance sigil etched into the wall. It glowed with a soft, malevolent energy. We had been watched the entire time. And that question, why my hand had pulled back from his, sat there between Kalen and me like something unfinished. The phantom pressure of the hidden drive still pulsed against my palm, a stubborn echo of its weight. I found myself standing before the slightly ajar door to Kalen's study, where the faint, clean scent of ozone and old paper spilled out into the hall. My phone buzzed against my thigh with an encrypted call. I slipped inside the empty study and answered. Marcus's face filled the screen, his hair matted with dust from the duct. His eyes, my loyal friend's eyes, were wide with a fear I had put there. No time, he said, his voice a strained whisper. The files are fragmented, but I pieced it together. Opal Genesis wasn't a project, it was a procurement system. Data packets bloomed across my screen. Shipping manifests listed Omega designations as cargo. Blurred photos showed terrified faces behind cage bars. A cold nausea tightened my stomach. His world had rules I didn't understand and couldn't survive. And this was one of them. Marcus highlighted a recurring location code name. They call it the Kennels. The next transport arrives tomorrow night at the old coastal docks. The study door swung open without a sound. Kalen stood on the threshold, his alpha presence filling the space. He had heard everything. His gaze locked onto my screen, then my face. His anger was a visible force, but a single muscle in his jaw fluttered with a frantic, trapped rhythm. The mate bond gave a sickening lurch inside my chest, a confused ache of shared fury. I turned the screen toward him. "Is this the stability you protect?" I asked, my voice hollow. The screen went dark, but the image of those shipping crates was burned into the back of my eyes. Kalen just stared at the space where Vex's smug face had been. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was charged, like the air right before lightning strikes. And then his breath hitched. It was a sharp, ragged sound, the kind you make when you're trying not to break something. He finally turned from the fireplace. His golden eyes found me across the room, and the mate bond in my chest gave a painful, sympathetic throb. It was full of his fury, yes, but underneath that, a cold, creeping dread. He walked toward me, each step measured, until he was close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him. "Tomorrow night," he said, his voice low and rough. "At the docks, we verify the manifest. My people will handle the perimeter." I shook my head before I even thought about it. "No, Marcus will be there. He's the only one who knows the system well enough to access the real logs. Your people might scare them off or trigger a purge. It has to be me." "It's too dangerous." The words were flat, final, Alpha's orders. "Everything is dangerous," I shot back, my own temper flaring to meet his. "Sitting here is dangerous. Letting Vex twist the narrative is dangerous. You saw what he did in there. He's not just denying it, he's building a case against us, against me. If I don't show up with proof, he wins without a single claw being drawn." Kalen's gaze dropped to my hands, which were clenched at my sides. He was quiet for a long moment. "You would use yourself as bait." "I'm using myself as the key," I corrected him. "There's a difference." A muscle ticked in his jaw. He looked conflicted, torn between the alpha who needed to control the risk and the man who, through this damned bond, might actually understand why I had to do it. He reached out not to grab, but his fingers hovered near my arm where the strange, opal-furred limb had emerged in the council chamber. "If you go," he said slowly, "you follow my lead. Every step. You do not deviate, you do not engage, you find the proof and you get out. Is that clear?" It was a concession, a huge one. I nodded, the motion stiff. "Clear." His hand finally closed, not around my arm, but around my hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not crushing. The bond didn't flare with warmth this time. It settled into a low, steady hum of grim resolve. We were in this together now, for better or worse. "Get some rest," he said, his thumb brushing once over my knuckles before he let go. "Dawn comes early." He left then, the door clicking shut softly behind him. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, listening to the sleet tap against the glass. My hand still tingled where he'd held it. But the question was still there, wasn't it? Why my hand had pulled back from his before. It wasn't just the instinct to act alone. It was the fear of this, of being pulled into his orbit, into his wars, of having my choices become our strategies. Now, I'd stepped right into the center of it. I pushed away from the sink and went to the window. The storm had painted the world in shades of black and silver. Somewhere out there, Marcus was hiding, trusting me with his life. And somewhere else, Vex Drogon was plotting, sure of his own victory. Tomorrow night at the docks, all of those threads would finally snap tight. I just had to hope I was strong enough not to get cut when they did. The front door clicked shut and Kalen's control shattered. He turned from the fireplace and his movement was wrong. Jerky. Pained. He lunged for the heavy oak table and gripped the edge with both hands. A low, guttural growl ripped from his throat. It was pure agony. I saw the muscles in his forearms knot and twist under his skin. His head dropped between his shoulders and his whole body began to shudder. I took a step forward, my own fear a cold knot in my stomach. He was transforming, but the moon wasn't full. This was something else. something forced and violent. I remembered his hand waiting for mine in the library. He had needed an anchor then. He had no anchor now. I said his name, but the word was barely a whisper. The echo of his growl was still a cold fist around my ribs, squeezing with each breath. I found myself standing on the chilled basement tiles, the only sound the frantic scrape of my own nails against a silver door handle. ID followed the sounds of his agony down here. Kalen was braced against the far wall of a bare stone room, his shoulders hunched with a violent tremor. A low, pained rasp came from his throat with every exhale. The scent of heated copper and wild mint flooded the chamber, thick with distress. I took one step in, and his head snapped toward me. Leave. The word was a strained command that vibrated through the bond. It pulled at my muscles like a strong current. My breath caught with a sharp pain. I forced another step forward instead. His eyes, usually a cool gray, now swirled with molten silver. He pushed himself upright, his frame shuddering. Ilara, go now. His voice broke on the last word. The bond screamed at me to obey, a piercing ache behind my eyes. My hand rose toward him of its own accord, then stopped. I remembered why my hand had pulled back before. It was the fear of touching something that would own me completely. The transformation took him then. It wasn't a shift, it was a brutal rewriting. His form contorted, and the sound of cracking bone filled the small room. I pressed my back against the cold wall, my heart hammering. The creature that finished forming was enormous. A wolf of dense silver fur and glowing, intelligent eyes. It turned its massive head toward me, lips peeling back from teeth longer than my fingers. I held my ground. My voice was a thread. The floor is stone. You can feel its solidness. The wolf paced, a low rumble in its chest. It stopped and stared, its gaze locked on mine. The pain in those eyes was a living thing. It took one heavy step closer. Then another. I kept talking, reminding it of the present, of my steady scent. The great head lowered, ears flattening. A whine escaped its throat. Pure confusion. Then, with a shudder that rippled through its entire body, the wolf laid its heavy head on the tiles. Its eyes never left mine, but the fury in them dimmed to exhaustion. We stayed like that as the hours stretched. The first gray light of dawn filtered through a high, narrow vent. The wolf form blurred and shrank back into the shape of a man. Kalen lay curled on his side on the floor, naked and shivering in the sudden quiet. His eyes opened, searching the room until they found me. His voice was raw and broken. Ilara. The ghost of his feverish heat still clung to my palms. I stood in the doorway of his study, the scent of old leather and damp stone in the air. Kalen was staring at the moonlit trees outside, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. I stopped a few feet away and hugged my arms across my chest. The silence between us was thick, heavy. It pressed down on me like a physical weight. You have to leave. He didn't look at me. His voice was flat and empty. It was an alpha command. I flinched as the words hit me like a slap. The bond in my chest twisted into a hard, painful knot. He wasn't human. I had to keep reminding myself of that. No. The single word scraped my throat raw. I forced my feet to move and took one step closer. I trust you. His head dropped forward as if my words were a blow. He turned to face me then. His golden eyes were full of a desperate fear I'd never seen in him before. The line of his mouth was pale and thin. He almost reached for me. His hand lifted slightly from his side, then fell back again. It's because I can't protect you, he breathed out. The formal command in his voice broke apart. His admission was raw, and it shattered the last of my resolve. I stared at the empty space where his hand had almost touched mine. The cold air from the window bit through my shirt. We had just survived the moon together. I had been his anchor. I had stayed. I am not a liability you can discard, I said. My voice shook, but the words were clear. Our alliance is real. Kalen's entire frame seemed to shrink. Then he drew himself up. His expression closed off completely, becoming a mask of cold resolve. The fear in his eyes vanished, replaced by something hard and final. He told me to leave his territory. His voice was low, but it vibrated with this absolute alpha power. Do not return. The command just seized my muscles. My body turned toward the door without my consent. A helpless fury burned in my chest right alongside this devastating sense of betrayal. I walked out into the gathering storm. But that question, why his fear vanished into that cold mask, it wasn't going away. The phantom pressure of his command still squeezed my ribs. a vice I couldn't pry loose even as I walked. I finally collapsed against the hunting cabin's door, my forehead pressed to wood that smelled of old pine sap and profound rot. Rain hammered the roof with a sound like rolling stones. I sat by the weak fireplace I'd managed to light, shivering. And then Kalen Thorne, the alpha who had cast me out, was just there, leaning against the far wall, watching the flames like they held a secret. His face looked hollow in the flickering light. A deep shiver racked my body from the cold damp in my clothes. Kalen pushed off the wall without a word. He crossed the small space and silently draped his own dry jacket over my shoulders. The heavy fabric was still warm from his body. His fingers brushed the side of my neck as he settled the collar. We both froze at the contact. The bond between us gave a soft pull, like a sigh. He did not move his hand away for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was so low I almost didn't hear it over the storm. "For the command." This admission from the proud alpha stunned me. I turned my head just slightly on instinct. My cheek almost touched the back of his still hand. He smelled of rain and the sharp, clean scent of his own skin. He pulled his hand back fast as if burned, but he did not return to his distant wall. Kalen sat on the rough floorboards beside my chair instead. He leaned his back against the stone hearth, his eyes on the fire. I did not give the jacket back to him. We sat in that tense silence for a long time while the wind screamed outside. I watched the way his breath moved his shoulders. His control was a visible weight he carried. The rest made sense. Why I'd flinched when his hand touched my neck didn't. The ghost of his hollow confession was a cold stone lodged in my ribs the next morning. I stood on the safe house's creaking porch, the scent of freshly split pine logs cutting through the damp air. The front door was broken inward, hanging from one hinge. Splinters of wood were scattered on the floorboards. My heart jumped into my throat. My hands went cold. Kalen moved past me without a word. He shoved the door open wider with his shoulder, sniffing the air once. I saw his shoulders tense under his jacket. I followed him inside. The main room was a wreck, overturned furniture, scattered papers. A wooden table was smashed in two. A familiar floor lamp lay broken on the floor, its shade bent. I knelt down and picked up a sheet of paper with Marcus Finch's tight handwriting. It was torn almost in half. The way Kalen looked at me just then. It wasn't the bond. I didn't know what to do with that. "No scent of blood," Kalen growled. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim room. "But other wolves were here." He moved through the chaos with a hunter's silence. He bent and picked up a familiar object from the floor. It was a pair of cracked, wire-frame glasses. He held them in his palm for a long moment, his thumb brushing the broken lens. His expression was a mask of cold fury, but his hand was very still. I held up the torn paper in my hand. One word was clear and circled in Marcus's notes: kennels. My friend was gone, but he'd left the next clue. I looked from the paper to Kalen's face. He met my eyes across the ruined room. "Vex," I said, my voice flat. It wasn't a question. Kalen didn't answer. He turned his head sharply toward the far wall. A single, clean note card was pinned there with a narrow dagger. We walked toward it together. His arm brushed against mine, and a flicker of warmth cut through the dread. The cold bite of that dagger-pin note still sat like a shard of ice behind my ribs. My boots met the rain-slicked concrete of the loading dock with a wet crunch. The warehouse was heavy with oil-stained silence. Kalen moved toward a rusted service door ahead of me, his broad back blocking my view of the dark entrance. I grabbed his arm to stop him, my fingers digging into the damp leather of his sleeve. "He wants your rage," I whispered into the space between us. "That's the trap. My compliance is the surprise." Kalen looked down at my hand on his arm. He did not pull away from my touch. The hard line of his shoulders dropped a fraction under my grip. "If I see him hurt because of me," Kalen said. His voice was a rough scrape in the dark. "I am afraid of what I will do." The confession hung in the air. It surprised us both. He turned his wrist slowly so the back of his hand brushed against my fingers. The contact sent a quiet warmth through the bond. Our faces were close in the deep shadow of the doorway. Something locked in my chest and refused to move. Kalen leaned in slightly, then stopped himself. He stepped back and rubbed a hand over the center of his chest. He gave a single, sharp nod. "You walk in first. You stay where I can see you." It was not an alpha command. It was a request from a partner. But why my breath caught when he almost leaned in, I still had no answer for that. The cold knot Kalen's grip had left in my shoulder still pulsed with a dull ache. I stepped onto the exchange floor, and the stale scent of rust and old rain filled my lungs. Then I saw him. Marcus lay in a pool of gray light under a broken skylight. I ran to him, my boots echoing. A sharp hydraulic hiss screamed above me. A lattice of dark metal bars slammed down around us. They hit with a heavy, final clang. Kalen was shut outside the cage. He threw himself against the bars with a furious snarl. Vex Drogon's smooth voice laughed from the rafters. He said the alloy was silver and wolfsbane. A wave of nausea hit me the moment he spoke. I swayed, bracing a hand on the cold floor beside Marcus. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Kalen roared. He shook the bars again. The smell of burning flesh reached me. His palms smoked where they gripped the metal. He could not break through. I looked from Marcus's pale face to Kalen's burning hands. My own panic settled into a cold, hard lump in my throat. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. There was a difference. What could I do if he could not save us? I forced myself to stand. I turned my face toward the shadowed ceiling. Kalen stopped shaking the bars. His breath came in ragged pants. He looked at me, and his eyes were wide with a raw fear I had never seen in him before. He opened his mouth but said nothing. That silent crack in his armor scared me more than the cage. The cage suppresses alpha strength, Vex's voice echoed down. It also dampens and unbonded Omega's senses. Your unique potential is quite the resource, Alara. It becomes inert once you complete the mate bond. I felt the blood drain from my face. Men emerged from the shadows outside the cage. They ignored Kalen and began securing the locked panels. Kalen stared at me, his expression crumbling into horrified understanding. His deepest fear had been backwards all along. The cold burn of the alloy still radiated through my bones. Through the bars, I could see the frantic pulse in Kalen's throat. The nausea made my head swim as heavy footsteps echoed closer. Vex's men were moving in. Kalen watched my face from inches away. His eyes tracked my struggle to focus. He pressed his forehead against the cold bars opposite mine. His gaze held mine with a fierce intensity. His voice was a low, pained rasp meant only for me. When they take you, you play along. You do not fight them yet. The full moon rises in 2 nights. You wait for that signal. I gave one sharp nod. A cold sweat traced down the back of my neck. The reality of his instructions settled in my stomach like a stone. I made my voice as steady as my foggy mind allowed. I won't reject our bond, not even to spoil his plans. The admission was the only solid truth I had left. It was not about surrender, but survival. I lifted my heavy hand and placed my palm flat against the bar near his cheek. The alloy was so cold it burned. It would hurt too much to break it now. Our fingers almost touched through the narrow gap. The space between our skin hummed with a warm, aching pull. He did not close the final distance. I will find you, he whispered, his breath warm in the cold air between us. Can you hold on until then? The warehouse doors groaned open behind me with a sharp metallic screech. I kept my eyes locked on his and gave one final, trusting nod. I did not look back as the footsteps closed in. The ghost of his forehead's chill lingered on my skin. In the pre-dawn gloom of his study, the only light came from the dying embers and the hearth. Kalen stood by his heavy desk. He held the small black data chip between his thumb and forefinger. His hands shook with a fine, constant tremor. Marcus risked everything for this. The silence was thick with the scent of cold ash and old leather. Kalen's jaw was a hard line. He did not look at me as he turned and plugged the chip into his computer. A red symbol flashed on the dark screen, a wolf's head inside a locked circle. Kalen stared at it. His breath hissed out between his teeth. He slammed his other fist down on the wooden desk. The sound was sharp and final. He understood. His father's final secret required a Thorn bloodline signature to open. He picked up a letter opener from the desk, a slim blade of polished steel. He pricked the pad of his thumb without hesitation. A single dark bead of blood welled up. Kalen smeared his blood across a small scanner pad. The red symbol vanished. Files and images exploded across the monitor in a chaotic cascade. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the desk. His eyes were wide and fixed on the glowing text. I saw his shoulders tense and lock. His breath caught in his throat with a soft, choked sound. I saw my mother's face in a council identification photo. I saw my own real birth name typed in bold official font. I saw stamped orders with harsh black lettering. Kalen's head bowed for a second, as if under a physical weight. The truth was worse than he ever imagined. I watched his golden eyes track across lines of text. I saw the exact moment he recognized other names. Names of high-ranking pack leaders. Names from his own trusted inner circle. His head snapped up. He looked from the screen to the study door. His expression was stripped raw, showing a deep and instant paranoia. Who could he trust now? He moved with sudden, sharp urgency. He ejected the data chip with a quick click and tucked it into a hidden slot inside his own wristwatch. Then he turned to look at me, and the way he looked at me just then, it wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with that. He saw me not as a problem to solve, but as the end of his entire world. Why his eyes looked at me like the end of his world? I wasn't going to like the answer. The phantom scent of his blood still coated the back of my tongue, metallic and cold. I stood in the garage's concrete silence, the only movement the slow drip of an oily leak onto the floor. His order to stay was a chain around my ribs. I paced the length of the parked motorcycle, my boots scuffing on the gritty concrete. Marcus was in a cage because of me. Every second I waited felt like a betrayal. The PAC's main terminal was locked down. But Kalen forgot I'd spent weeks as his captive here. I'd built a backdoor into the system then, a tiny act of rebellion. I pulled a tablet from a workbench drawer. My fingers flew across the screen. The satellite grid unfolded before me. My old tech skills felt rusty but familiar, like putting on a worn jacket. I bypassed the firewall with a line of code I'd saved for this exact moment. A single signal pulsed on the map. A digital heartbeat from a location labeled Black Rock Compound. It was a clear and open beacon, not a hidden trace. Vex wanted me to see it. A sharp, cold breath caught, making my chest feel tight. Going there was walking into his jaws. Not going meant leaving Marcus to rot. I pressed my palms flat against the cool metal of the workbench to steady their shaking. Fear was a cold stone in my gut. Leading Kalen into another trap would break the fragile trust we'd built. It could get him killed. But the memory of Marcus's voice, cut off mid-transmission, was a sharper pain. He was family I had chosen. And I dragged him into this. I could not abandon him now. The conflict made my head pound. I stared at the beacon's steady pulse on the screen, a perfect lure. My choice crystallized in the quiet hum of the garage lights. Kalen would never risk his pack for a human. He'd call it strategy. I called it a death sentence for Marcus. Vex wanted the Omega, so the Omega would come alone. I typed a panic code into the system. An automated distress signal, set to broadcast my location to Kalen in 30 minutes. That was my head start. I swung my leg over the motorcycle seat, the leather creaking under me. The engine snarled to life with a twist of my wrist. This was defiance, but it was also protection. I was trading his cage for my own choice. I gunned the engine and sped into the gray morning, leaving the safety of his territory behind. The sting of windburn still tightened the skin across my cheeks from that reckless ride. The sterile chill of the sealed concrete corridor seeped through my jacket. A single buzzing overhead light threw my elongated shadow ahead. I pressed my back to the cold wall. My pulse was a frantic drum against my ribs. I'd expected Kalen's fury to tear through the bond first. I braced for the searing heat of his alpha command. Instead, the connection remained a thin, strained wire. I felt only my own terror and the heavy silence of the compound. Then the wire pulled taut. A wave of pure, undiluted alarm crashed into me. It was not directed at me. It was for me. Kalen, the powerful alpha, was afraid. The bond held that frantic frequency for a long moment. I shut my eyes against the buzzing light. I focused on the thread between us. I let my own regret bleed through. I showed him the cold corridor. I showed him my resolve to find Marcus. I showed him my guilt for breaking my word. The bond did not burn. It warmed. The alarm softened into a raw and focused worry. It was a feeling he had never sent me before. He wasn't human. I had to keep reminding myself of that. This was not a human worry. It was vast and primal. A tectonic plate shifting deep beneath his rage. His voice formed in my mind then. It was not the hard gravel of command. It was stripped bare and quiet. I felt you leave. The words were a confession. It was like my heart stopped. I opened my eyes, my breath fogged in the chill air. I saw nothing but the empty corridor. I felt everything. The truth of his words was an ache in my own chest. It was not a cage. It was an anchor. I pressed a hand over my sternum. I sent back a pulse along that thread. I sent warmth and my location and a silent, desperate apology. The bond accepted it. The bond held. I'm coming. His mental voice was softer now, a promise in the dark. Don't move. It was not an order. It was a plea. I nodded to the empty air before me. A single tear traced a line through the dust on my cheek. I did not wipe it away. I stayed pressed against the wall. I listened to the hum of the overhead light. I waited in the silence he had filled with his fear. The space between us felt smaller now. It felt charged with everything we had not yet said. What Kalen had said under his breath when he thought I wasn't listening, I'd been wrong to ignore it this long. The echo of his raw fear was still a second heartbeat in my chest. My own breath sounded too loud in the quiet. The air smelled like cold concrete and something sharp, something clean that couldn't cover up the damp underneath. Kalen stood across from me. The howls from outside were getting closer, and his shoulders, they just slumped, like all the weight in the world finally landed on them. He reached out and took my hand. His fingers trembled against my skin. "My father was the alpha," he whispered. His voice was thick, scraped raw. "I ran from that life. I'm still running." He stared at the floor between us. He couldn't look at me. His thumb moved across the back of my hand in this tiny, unconscious circle. That simple touch felt more intimate than any command he'd ever given. The bond in my chest warmed with a sudden, sharp ache. I pulled my hand back. The movement felt stiff. Wrong. All that imposing strength just crumbled right in front of me. His pain became a real thing in the air. My own chest tightened with a sympathy I didn't ask for. I took a step back on the gritty floor. I shook my head, slow, trying to make it make sense. Kalen looked up then. His golden eyes held a pure, undisguised fear. It wasn't fear of the enemy outside. He was afraid of me. "You are my true mate, Alara. I have nothing to offer you but this truth." He opened his empty hands to me, total surrender. He waited for my judgment without his mask, and I remembered what he'd said under his breath when he thought I wasn't listening. He'd called my name like a prayer against the dark. Now I understood the cost of that prayer, and pulling my hand away, that feeling wasn't going away. My hand still hummed with the memory of his grip. We were in a quiet corner, dawn light streaking the polished floor. The air tasted like dust and copper. Then Vex stepped from the shadows. His eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light. He threw his head back and held a long, sharp challenge right at Kalen. The sound cut the morning in half. "The title is mine," he growled, his voice rough from screaming. Kalen let out a low rumble in answer. He looked at me for one heavy second. His mouth was a hard, flat line. He had no choice, not under pack law. He ripped off his torn shirt, the fabric tore with a sharp sound. He nodded once at Vex, accepting the duel. His shoulders were tense slabs of muscle. He stepped away from me into the open space, and I felt it, a flicker of warmth through our bond, a silent promise. He wasn't just an alpha now. He was a man fighting for our future. They crashed together like two storms. The impact was a thick, meaty thud. Snarls filled the air, the scrape of claws on tile, then blinding white headlights cut through the hazy dawn. Council member Arlen stepped out from between the vehicles. He smoothed his jacket. A squad of elite enforcers fanned out behind him, rifles raised. Arlen watched the two alphas with this detached, cold interest. "The mess here is quite substantial," he said. His voice was too calm for the blood on the floor. His pale eyes landed on me, and stayed. "A clean slate is required. No witnesses can be left alive to this unfortunate incident." Kalen and Vex broke apart. They were both breathing hard. They looked at each other, then at the ring of armed guards. A silent understanding passed between them. The rival alphas turned slowly. They didn't stand together, but they faced the same direction now. I moved toward the door. What Kalen had said under his breath when he thought I wasn't listening, it moved with me. Real quick, if you're rooting for a love that fights back against the whole world, hit subscribe. The finale is where everything changes. So what would you have done when the person who's supposed to be your cage turns out to be just as trapped as you are? Do you run toward them or away? Let me know in the comments. And if you need to know how this ends, I'll see you in the next one.